if footmen tire you, what will horses do? And our preacher, Brother Estus Pirkle, he preached a message like that. If footmen tire you, what will horses do? And it was during the time that America was threatened by communist takeover, and it was kind of based on that. So we shot a scene where I was laying in the street, and apparently the communists had shot me up or something. But I remember them filming me and had fake blood all over me, and I don't know, probably took a half a day to film, 30 seconds or whatever that was in there. And I think he showed it worldwide, really, in the end. He's a very interesting guy.
Where was your scene filmed?
In front of the courthouse, laying right on either the sidewalk or the edge of the street in the courthouse, because they wanted to get that in the background. Basically, I guess to show if it was a communist takeover, they'd take over the courthouse and everything else in the country.
Was all of the movie shot in Union County?
Yeah, I think some of it they used horses to shoot it, and a lot of it was shot out in those county roads. Because then there was a lot of gravel roads, so they used, wasn't a lot of traffic. So they filmed on a lot of those. Filmed at a couple of different churches, if I remember right. And I remember another part of that movie. I just was a glimpse, but I was one of 4 or 5 boys that would pick this guy up and drop him. They had a pulley in a tree, and you'd pick him up, and they had padding down there, but it just showed him going through the frame, being dropped, and show us dropping him, which I think that the whole idea was they'll even make your kids do stuff. The communists would if they took over, that they don't want to. So yeah, that's a long time ago. It was kind of interesting though.
Were a lot of the people like the extras in the movies, like people from the church?
Well, some of them were, yeah, most of them are people from around this county. There used to be a place out at Myrtle, the building's still there, but it's Camp Zion. So people came from several different states and would be extras in the movie. They hired actors and actresses for the main roles. But yeah, they would come. It was then Camp Zion was a big thing, and they'd have they call it camp meeting, maybe a couple of weeks a year, and people would come from all over this country really to it. And they had provisions for them to spend the night, and had cafeteria and all that. So that was a big thing then.
Was that his?
Dr. Ray, he directed. I don't know. I really don't know who owned it. I would assume the church, Myrtle Church, meets there now, in part of it. But then I guess the church owned it, because he passed away several years ago, and he stayed with the church. I don't know what they do with the buildings now. May have torn some of them down. They'd have like 1,000 or maybe 2,000 people that show up those camp meetings, and they were from everywhere in this country.
That wasn't related to Estus Pirkle's
Not film.
films.
Uh-uh.
That just happened to be a pool of people that they used. That
Yeah,
made them actors.
Yeah, of course he knew them all, because Brother Pirkle's, he and Dr. Ray they were real close, and so he'd go to the camp meeting too, every night, and so he knew most all these people, and when he decided to make the film, they called and wanted to know if they could be in it or any way they could help.
Do you remember him? I guess he was the preacher of your church when you were
He
growing
was
up?
at Locust Grove, yeah.
Locust Grove.
Yeah, he was the pastor there.
I bet you never fell asleep during his sermons, did you?
It was hard. Well, I probably have, but they were lively, let me tell you. And I do remember falling asleep a couple of times, until my parents looked back and saw me. But yeah, it was hard to. I sat in his back as far as I could in the back. But he also was an evangelist, and that church allowed him to do that. He would probably be home in his home church once or twice a month, but most of the time, especially during the week, he was on the road preaching revivals all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, he had a whole worldwide operation.
Yeah, he did, and traveled a lot of miles. He always just traveled by himself 90% of the time, and he'd go and he'd fly like to California, but North Carolina closer he'd drive, and that way he could get back. He could leave whenever he wanted to. And most time he would try to get back to Locust Grove on Sundays, but there was half the time he probably couldn't, because they'd want him to come preach on Sunday, up there or wherever he was. So he did, and then he got overseas in the Philippines and I just took off from there. Very interesting guy, very, very intelligent too. He was he had maybe one of his degrees, he had 3 or 4, was in astronomy, and he wrote a book on, I think it was called Preachers in Space or something like that. But I remember being at Locust Grove, and we'd go out at night, and he'd have a sermon on even the North Star. He'd show you where it would, and he'd have a sermon on that. So he had some different, very different ideas. But it was always a lively sermon when he preached.
And so you got to be an actor.
Oh, I guess you should call it that. Maybe a stand-in or something. Yeah, I didn't have any lines, so I just had to lay there and act like I was dead.
Do you know any other people who were in it that are still around today?
I know a few. Yeah, they're older. They're probably in their 80s. And the younger ones, I don't know if any of them are around here. I talked to 2 the other day. They moved to North Carolina when they were in it. They lived beside me. And I think they were in like the 9th grade. But one of them does live in Memphis now. The other one still lives in North Carolina. But I talked to both of them a couple of months ago. But I don't know. Or I'm sure there are, but I can't remember who they'd be. Well, there's quite a few of them stand-ins, several. And if people volunteered, they wanted to let them, have a part in it. And there's a lot of volunteering.
When was the last time you watched that movie?
Whew. 8 or 10 years, I would guess. Somebody sent it to me on YouTube, and that's how. I didn't even know it was on YouTube. So I watched probably half of it or more. Just didn't take the time to watch all of it.
Yeah.